Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I am your host, Alison Price, and I'm here again with my good friend and co-host, Arwynne O'Neill.
Hello, Alison. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us once more. So in this episode, we've decided we're going to be talking about books, and we're going to be talking about the basic books that you should get when you first start to learn astrology. And these are books that we are recommending you get so that if you've got them, you can read a natal chart.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to a super deep level, and we're not talking about forecasting. We're talking about how to read a birth chart.
Yeah.
So we're going to be giving our listeners our suggestions. Arwynne has 5 books. I have 5 books, and we don't know who's got what at the moment, so that will also be interesting.
Yeah.
And we're going to be making some recommendations because these are the questions we are getting a lot of in your responses, that you'd like some guidance on which books to buy because there's so many out there.
Right. Absolutely.
So we're going to start then. Arwynne's going to start with her first recommendation for a basic natal chart reading book.
Yeah. So my first one, and this should be no surprise to anyone, is a Stephen Arroyo book. And honestly, you could start with any early Stephen Arroyo book as your first astrology book. This was probably my first one, although I don't remember because I think I bought his first few books all at the same time when I was in my little, self-study frenzy about 20 some odd years ago.
Right.
But this is Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements, an energy approach to astrology and its use in the counseling arts. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically astrology, psychology, and the four elements. And basically this book is all about his energy approach to astrology. So he is one of the founders of psychological astrology, basically one of the OGs, as we say. And this book outlines his approach to psychological analysis of the birth chart through the four elements. So obviously fire, water, air, and earth. And he talks about the importance of just basically wrapping your head, first of all, around that. If you bite off nothing else, bite off the elements first. And then he goes into great detail about what the four elements behave like through the signs and how they are interpreted through your energy patterns. And he gives lots of great celebrity examples and how the language of the energies can be used to understand psychological dynamics. So earth being stability, practicality, an earthy approach to life, fire being energetic and dominating and forceful and outgoing, air being intellectual and thoughtful and water being emotional. And so once you understand those things, you don't stop there, obviously, but that is probably the very first thing, at least that's the way I learned, that you really want to wrap your head around as someone who's just getting into astrology. You can really look at someone's chart and just see the placements of their planets through those four energies, four elements, and get a feel for their personality right after that.
Fantastic. So this is your first recommendation for a basic astrology book?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. And we are going to put all the links to all of these books will be below in the show notes and on the blog post that goes with it. Yeah, Arwynne, I think that's a great book. It's a book that's also on my shelf. It's really a solid, I want to call it modern day psychological astrology book. And this is great. It's a great first book to come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your first?
So actually, my first book is a big one. It would be, wouldn't it? I'm actually recommending that you get an ephemeris.
Yep, I thought that might be your first.
Yes, I know. And the reason is because if you're going to do charts, you need an ephemeris. Beyond dabbling, you need an ephemeris. And the one I recommend is it's called the American Ephemeris, 1950 to 2050 at midnight. It doesn't really matter. You can get it at noon, but I've got the midnight one. And it's got the purple cover. So back in the day, there was a red one, and then there was a blue one. And as time has moved on, when we got past the millennium, it's onto the purple one. And this one also has Chiron in it, which the previous ones didn't.
Right.
So it's really quite a handy book that you could prop up a table leg with or But this is my second one because they just fall apart with use.
I see that. That's amazing.
But if you are serious about doing astrology, and if you're one of my students, you definitely need to get yourself an ephemeris. So that's going to be my first recommendation.
And what's the difference, just to throw this out there, what's the difference between the noon and the midnight?
So the midnight one actually has the planetary positions for 0000 on the 1st of January, whereas the noon one has it for 12 noon on the 1st of January at Greenwich.
Right. Okay. So if you're in the Western Hemisphere, maybe the midnight one's.
Oh, the hemisphere doesn't matter. It just means if you're doing manual calculations, which of course we're not really, you then have to add towards noon or you have to take away from noon within your calculation.
Got it.
So if you have midnight, you just know you're adding from midnight.
Oh, I see. As opposed to subtracting.
Yes. Yeah. So you don't have that brain thing about, oh my God.
I'm so used to subtracting 8.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I recommend this one. It's a great book. There are other ephemerides, of course, but this is solid, and you can just get it straight off Amazon. We'll put a link below.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on. So, Arwynne, which book are you recommending next?
Number 2 spot for me goes to The Inner Sky by Stephen Forrest. And the full book name, and anyone who listens to the podcast will know that this is one of my faves because I quote it all the time. And it's okay. So The Inner Sky, The Dynamic New Astrology for Everyone by Stephen Forrest. And it's such a great basic book. And it is just so well written, like anything by Stephen Forrest. And I'm going to sound like a shameless fangirl here, but he is such a brilliant writer and so accessible. And I listen to his podcasts as well, and he reads aloud his articles a lot of the time. So if you go to his website, you click any article, half the time he will have also read it. So it's like, read this article, or have it read it out loud to me, which of course I'm going to choose that because I love audiobooks, I love podcasts.
Yeah.
And it's in his warm, buttery, fatherly, amazing voice. I love it so much. I could just listen to him read, pretty much anything. But yeah, you can hear his voice when you read this book.
Fantastic. Yeah. So let me ask you, because we do know that he's an evolutionary astrologer, but this is mainstream astrology.
It's very basic. Yes, this is very basic. He talks about what are the signs, what are the houses, what does the moon mean in this thing, what is the third house. And when we did our house episodes, I read liberally from this book because the descriptions he gives of doing your third house right or wrong are amazing. And just these brilliant little phrases he'll come up with, they'll just kind of pierce your heart and you go, oh my God, I've never thought of it that way. And it's so true and accurate and poignant.
Right.
And that's really what you want in astrology writing. It's something that you just go, oh God, that's the human experience,
Right.
Yeah. That's
no, I agree. That is a brilliant book. And I think it's a great suggestion for a first basic natal reading book.
Yeah, for sure. And you find little things in here that obviously when you first are learning astrology, what you want to know about is yourself, right?
Yeah.
So
even when you've been doing it for a while.
Exactly. Let's be real. But like you can see where I've highlighted things with my little pink pencil, and because you can't use a highlighter pen on a paperback book. But I buy most of my books from like used bookstores or now online for sure.
I was going to say this is a well-loved book by the look of it.
It was loved by someone before me, and
now that's also a good thing with astrology books. If you do happen to get them, and maybe you've got duplicates, hand them on to someone who could benefit from them.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I've got Jupiter in the 3rd house, so of course my bookshelves runneth over. And I have been giving astrology books to friends for their birthdays when they're interested. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great choice as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he talks about like what are trines, what are sextiles, what
your basic stuff,
all the basics.
Yeah,
just and a little bit, and then of course his interpretation, chapter starts out with, "So are you getting dizzy yet?" Yeah, exactly. But it's a great reference book as well for later when you actually do know stuff, and you're like, "Wait a minute, well, oh right, Yeah.
That is a great recommendation. Yeah, appreciate that.
What's your second book?
So the second book I am recommending is Jane Struthers's Understanding Astrology, How to Unlock the Secrets of Your Personality. Now, this is a rather, I don't want to call it a picture book, but it is richly decorated. It's very simple.
Yeah.
It's bringing an introduction into the signs and to the planets as well, and just some general stuff. But it's one of these, I would call this an entryway book, where it's not quite a coffee table book, and it does have solid astrology in it, but you kind of ease into it. And if you are a beginner, I think this would be an ideal book to just kind of whet your appetite to decide, well, I've got to read a few chapters here on Mercury. Do I need to go a little deeper? And maybe you do, maybe you don't. But this would be an excellent book to for you to start with, or even for a younger person, or even an older person trying to learn astrology. This would be an ideal book just to get you going and give you some ideas about what astrology actually is.
100%. And that's interesting, because that book, as you're paging through it, I have several books that have that same sort of graphic design element. And to me, that is exactly the kind of book that started coming out after the internet, when people had a certain expectation of how to absorb information. It's punctuated by a lot of pictures. It's got little sidebars. It's very bite-sized, but yet dense with information. And I really do appreciate that design aesthetic with a lot of books too.
And it's solid, but it's basic astrology, and it's definitely an introductory book. I think it's a nice little book. It's one that I tried to get my kids to learn astrology with, but nobody was having it. So anyway, but that's
bedtime stories. Let's learn about Capricorn tonight.
They're saying, well, what's that symbol? And I'm saying, no. So I quite like this. I mean, obviously it's a book that I read a while ago, but back in the day I used to buy every single astrology book that came out.
Me too, you can tell. My apartment.
And this is really a nice one. And even for beginners who are just saying to me, well, Alison, I'd like to know a little bit more about astrology, but where do you begin? This would be a very lightweight introduction. That's what I'd like to say about this book.
That's a really good way of putting it, for sure.
Yeah.
Much more lightweight than my two beginner books.
Okay, Arwynne, so what's your third recommendation?
Okay, well, my third recommendation is The Ascendant by Jodie Forrest. And this is another one that I've quoted liberally. And yes, Forrest is no coincidence. This is the ex-wife of Stephen Forrest. And she's an astrologer in her own right. She has written a wonderful book, which I find absolutely fascinating. It's about the ascendant, clearly, but she goes into all of these amazing little exercises that you can do. Like here, and these are also wonderful, like, conversation starters if you are into astrology and you have people over who are also similarly into astrology. So like, here is one, example of questions you can ask. How does your persona feel different from your individual ego? So that would be your sun sign versus your rising sign. So I personally have, my sun in Virgo, and I have Scorpio rising. So how are those different? Well, they're very different, but they're complementary, and blah, blah, blah. So I'm like the intellectual, bookish introvert, but on the outside, I'm like the goth with the headphones over the whatever and the dark eyeliner, etc. And so you can picture it. And that's what the ascendant is all about. It's all about your mask to the world. So it's ways to assimilate and understand and sort of imagine, and in the sense of images, your ascendant. And she talks about, like, what kind of car would your ascendant drive? What kind of walk would your ascendant have?
Right.
And of course the walk of the Leo would be, like the John Travolta strut at the end of Staying Alive, or right. The crab walk for the Cancer rising, the sort of scuttling sideways.
I went to a presentation of hers in Toronto one time.
Nice.
Yeah, she was talking about the ascendant then. That is definitely her thing. So I think it's a great book because we can so often see ascendants.
Yeah.
So as a beginner, you can say, oh, he's tall. Oh, that's how they're shuffling and so on.
Exactly, and how they dress, or what kind of car they drive, or
how they present, which is the ascendant. Yeah, it's a great choice.
Yeah, and it's also very beginner oriented. Like, even though you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, the ascendant, that's deep, but it makes it very accessible. Like, and it gives you little quizzes at the end of it, which are super helpful. And then it also talks about, like, if you have the whatever your rising sign is, and then the ruler of it in each house. So it goes into a little bit more depth too. It's not just like kind of all fun and games. It's like, if you have Cancer rising, but then your moon is in the 11th house, what does that mean?
Right.
So, it's a little in depth, but it's also very, very accessible and very readable and beginner friendly.
What was that name again?
The Ascendant by Jodie Forrest.
Fantastic.
And that's Forrest with 2 R's. And what's your third?
So my third option for a beginner astrology book is Practical Astrology by Priscilla Costello. This is quite a slim volume.
Mm.
Now, it's called Practical Astrology. She's a Virgo, so it's practical. So there's a keyword right there.
Nice.
And she has gone into it in a light way. She's talking about the signs, the planets, the houses, the aspect, and so on. There's quite a bit about where house systems came from. And it's really an introduction with quite a bit of almost background. But it is cookbooky in that you've got, Jupiter in the third, Jupiter in the fourth, and this is what you need when you're trying to learn things.
Oh, totally.
So there are other books that we've mentioned here tonight that actually do this as well.
Yeah.
But this is a smaller book that you could probably pop in your bag and take with you. On the go, astrology or astrologers in the wild, which is a phrase I'm kind of coining at the moment. But so it's quite a nice little book. It's she's a Toronto astrologer, and I think it's very well composed.
Nice.
I understand she is actually an English teacher, so it's well written.
Amazing.
And there's no fumbling about or confusion in this book. I think it's pretty straightforward.
I do love the Virgo astrology writers.
I know.
Few favorites.
So that's Practical Astrology by Priscilla Costello.
Nice.
Okay, Arwynne, so what's the next book you're recommending for a beginner astrologer?
My next book, and I'm going to just actually, we have 5 books each, but I really waffled between 2 books for my 4th book in this category, in Basic Natal Astrology. And I eventually selected Aspects and Personality by Karen Haymaker Zondag. And I've also quoted this a lot, especially in the Aspect series that I do on Wednesdays with Katya. And it's because it's also a very cookbooky kind of book. You can basically find any combination you want.
But this is what you
Jupiter,
need
Sun,
when you're
Saturn.
starting.
Well, exactly. And she doesn't go into every single aspect combination. She just will, she'll do like Sun square Jupiter / opposition. And then she'll talk a little bit about the differences. But it's like the hard aspects versus the conjunctions versus the soft aspects.
Right.
And so she goes into a little more detail. The book that I almost brought down for this category was Aspects by Sue Tompkins. And I also love that book. And I've highlighted almost as many passages in her book. The only reason I selected this one instead is because Sue Tompkins' book, she goes like Sun, Jupiter aspects. And then there's several pages where she talks about the different aspects between those two. She doesn't go into the division of like hard aspect versus soft aspects. And so I find myself reaching for that less when I want to just know about, okay, well, what's Sun square Jupiter?
Right.
And that's just because I know what I'm looking for.
Right.
But if you're just getting started, equally good, both of those books. They're very well written.
Yes.
And I find that they both have very, very down to earth, very practical, very usable descriptions of the planetary energies in combination. But I've selected
that's the one. So what was the name again?
Aspects and Personality by Karen Haymaker Zondag.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we'll put a link to that as well below.
Yeah. What's your 4th book?
So the 4th book I'm suggesting for basic natal astrology reading is We Love St. Stephen. It's Stephen Arroyo's Chart Interpretation Handbook.
Yes, I have it.
Of course you do. Of course you do. Any solid astrologer would have. And it's guidelines for understanding the essentials of a birth chart.
Yeah.
So this, again, is solid stuff. If you know what's in this book, you know everything you really need to know about chart reading.
Yeah.
It's a different, he has very straightforward ways of looking at it. He's quite distinctive between this, Moon square Jupiter, Moon trine Jupiter.
Yeah.
And there's definitely, he expresses himself well.
Yeah.
It's not a light read, I wouldn't say, but it's definitely a book that I reach for, as you would, because it's that type of thing as well.
It's his most cookbooky of all of his books.
All the books,
You don't get a lot of the mythology, a lot of the background, but you get just the
solid. Yeah.
It's almost like you'd reach for that instead of going to a website, because it's just the keywords. It's just the little paragraph or the little keywords that you need for each thing.
Yeah, and he's been around a while, and he was obviously, when we were learning astrology, this was what we reach for. Yeah. And this is, it's a well-used book. It's not my most dog-eared of books, but it's one that I do reach for as well.
Yeah.
So that's Chart Interpretation Handbook by Stephen Arroyo.
Yeah.
Okay, so Arwynne, so what's your final beginner book that you're recommending for our beginner astrologers out there?
All right. This is called How to Personalize the Outer Planets, the Astrology of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And it's edited by Noel Till, but it actually has articles or chapters by a variety of astrologers, including Jeff Jauer, Jay Jacobs, Mary Shea, Jeff Green, Joanne Wickenberg, etc. And it is all about the outer planets. And it's funny because that seems like it might be like more of an advanced topic, but no, it's not. It's just those basic planets.
Still, And the outer planets specifically are
Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
Okay.
Yeah. And not Chiron, that has its own books. but it has its own like sort of cookbook sort of sections where you can find like Mars, conjunctions with the outer planets, or Neptune conjunct Venus, or whatever. Neptune and your moon, Neptune and your sun. So you can definitely like take your own chart and kind of go, okay, what does it have to say about me? It also goes into transits. So when Uranus transits your Venus, how does that make you feel or whatever? Right. It's very psychologically oriented. All the astrologers quoted in here are absolutely from that era of sort of 70s, 80s, psychological astrology. And of course, Jeff Green, the OG of Pluto, it's great.
I think it's great to have specifically an outer planet book because they do deserve a deeper look.
For sure. Yes.
It's still basic astrology, but they're not the easiest planets to get a handle on.
Right.
So
it's funny how many books I have that are actually specifically about outer planets. Mm-hmm. And I think one of them is actually how to personalize the outer planets. Some of them they talk about outer planet people. This is a way that they kind of, because when these people were coming up, they were just integrating these energies.
Yes.
Pluto wasn't discovered until 1931. So it was within the lifetime of people who wrote these books.
In living memory.
Parents, at least, that they had just discovered Pluto. And they had yet to sort of really integrate what it meant in the chart.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's a great book. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And what is your final book?
So the final book I'm suggesting for beginner basic astrologers is Sue Tompkins's The Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook.
Nice.
An in-depth guide to interpreting your horoscope.
Excellent.
So I particularly like this book, and I do recommend it frequently because it was written within the last 10 years. So it's kind of easy to read. It's laid out more like we're used to now in this day and age. Mm-hmm. The words aren't crammed on the page. And she's actually a brilliant astrologer.
Yeah.
So I really like her work. It's, again, it's quite cookbooky, but it has to be because these are the beginner things. But she's also got some examples at the back of chart readings and so on, which kind of develop you a little further.
Yeah.
So I know some of the books that we do recommend are pretty oldish, but this one's more up to date, and it's a great book, and she is a brilliant astrologer.
Yeah,
so
I like her writing style too.
Yeah. So that's my recommendation. It's The Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook by Sue Tompkins.
Nice.
Okay, Arwynne, so this is great. You and I have both brought 5 of our go-to basic astrology books to recommend to
beginners. Yeah.
And the thing is with astrology books that you don't just buy one, you buy one a month, or if not one a week, because you do need to, if you're trying to immerse yourself in this topic, you need to have these books as reference.
Yeah. And you can always, we live in the internet age, you can always look something up, but then you won't have it. And there's something about actually, like, as I said, I highlight things, I circle them with a, colored pencil. It's always this one shade of reddish pink.
And many of these books that we've got out today have got tabs sticking out the side where we're reading things.
The Ascendant one, it's just riddled with colored post-it slips. Yeah.
Because these are actually books we're using.
Exactly.
Whereas there must be many books that I've purchased, and probably many books you've purchased, that I've read once, it's gone on the shelf. I've never gone back.
I'm sure that there are books I've had on my shelf that I've never read.
Yes.
I just bought it because it was at a used bookstore. I was like, I need this. And then I never looked at it again.
Whereas these books that we're recommending now are go-to books. Yeah. They're books that we're reaching for and using all the time because really you can't remember everything. You can't remember,
And there's something about physically reading something that's in an actual book. And I'm the first person to say that most of the books I read these days are audiobooks. Oh. And it's weird how few audiobooks there are available on astrology, to be honest. It's sort of a gray area at this point, which needs to be assimilated. But maybe that's because they are so reference oriented. It's harder to, kind of skip ahead.
They are reference books,
Yeah,
aren't
they're
they?
reference books.
Yeah.
That's why you need it visually. You need to be able to flip to the page and go, oh, I highlighted that's where the bookmark is.
This
The post-it note, the folded down page, the scribbled
Because
notes.
I think if you are trying to interpret a chart, say it's your third, fourth, or fifth chart you're trying to interpret, and maybe you've got, say, Mars in Taurus, you're not just going to read one person's Mars in Taurus interpretation and know what it means.
Right.
You're going to look at several different authors
Totally.
to get a view on what is the general meaning of Mars in Taurus.
Yeah.
And this is how you learn as well.
Absolutely. And you're going to memorize little phrases that pop out at you, which is why the really good writers sort of sink or float to the top.
Yes.
It's people like Stephen Forrest or Stephen Arroyo or Jodie Forrest, where they have a turn of phrase, or Sue Tompkins, who they'll just describe something so poignantly and vividly
Yes.
that it just sticks in your head and maybe becomes part of your vocabulary when you're talking to other people. And you might not even know you're quoting them anymore because it's just become so much a part of how you think about that particular planet or that particular placement.
And I do think it's interesting, too, that we've both come with different books. It wasn't organized beforehand.
No.
And, of course, some books speak to me more than the books perhaps that you are reading. They speak to you.
Yeah.
And to our listeners there, that other books may speak to you, too. And lean into what is appealing to you with the books you're using. Don't just take our recommendations. Use them as a starting point.
Yeah.
But you will find the authors that resonate with you and that you can understand, and you align yourself with their philosophies. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that has to be said as well, that
Definitely.
there's not one size fits all with astrology.
No. And, we're all for buying things online, but if you have the opportunity to go to a bookstore that has an astrology section, like that's the best way, really. I mean, whether you have like a specialty occult bookstore, like we are happy to have Banyan Books here in Vancouver. Awesome. But I mean, I am a huge supporter of used bookstores, and I love going in and finding just the little gems and the little what is this even, like the strange sizes and shapes that they made of books in certain
Back
eras.
in the day. Yes,
and you're like, I need this, and it's like,
I know it got to the stage or we are at the stage where I cannot go into Banyan Books with a credit card in my hand. I have to draw the cash beforehand, leave my credit card at home, and there's my budget.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Because you never know what you're going to find, and there might be just something that just leaps out at you. It could be an agenda, it could be a calendar, or it could even be an artwork.
Oh, I won't even go into that section with all the jewelry and the beautiful pieces of crystal and
the crystals,
just bowls full of like crystal shards.
And the journals. I love a good journal, and so that's actually what we got to, and. That's how I have to approach Banyan Books, which is kind of weird, really. It's like, is this really a problem? Well, maybe it is, but I couldn't just
managing
go in.
The addiction.
Yeah, because I'll get through the counter. I think, well, should I take all of these 7 books? Well, maybe if I just whittle it down to 2, and I just, So now it's like when I go into a casino, you only take cash, you never take your credit card.
Totally.
So, but if you're fortunate enough to have an esoteric bookshop nearby, then that's great. I know when we lived in Johannesburg, there was one esoteric bookshop, and it was called Aquarian Books. It was the tiniest little place, but they were stuffed to the ceiling with books. It was the only place you could get books.
Yeah.
Of course, now you can order all this stuff on Amazon, and the links I'll put below are all for Amazon.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's interesting. I think it's great once you start with an astrology bookshelf.
Yeah.
It never ends.
Yeah.
Right?
It never ends. It's true. It's 100% true.
All right, Arwynne. So we've been through we've suggested 10 basic astrology books for basic natal astrology chart reading. And you may have other books on your shelves, and don't feel obliged that you have to go and buy the books we're recommending. But if you are saying, well, which ones should I get of the myriad that's out there, then start with the ones that we've suggested.
Yeah.
And hopefully you can build your own bookshelf that way.
Absolutely. And read other people's reviews of books. That's an interesting thing too. I recommend Goodreads if you're wanting to know what everyone thought about a certain book. And it's not always good to like go to the crowd, but I found some good reviews on Goodreads, and it actually has helped me kind of go, will I like this book? Will I not? And kind of sometimes can read the reviews and be like, oh, okay, now you know what to expect a little more before you drop, a ton of money on a brand new.
That's great. That's great.
Purchase.
And maybe we'll start considering doing book reviews of new ones that come out. We'll give that some thought later on.
For sure.
So anyway, for our listeners, if you found value in this episode, please do consider sharing it with anybody who would be interested. And you are welcome to email us at starzology@gmail.com. and we'd like you to visit our website at starzology.com. So thank you so much, Arwynne, for being here today. It's been lovely.
Thank you, Alison. It's been great.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.